store this these states from the machine inside of the tech archive because we want to display them in the PM Analyze. And the difference between the state model definition we have done for PM Quality and the one we have done for PM Analyze, the one from PM Quality is already recorded by PM Quality. That means we just want to have them available in the moment we're inside of the state, because PM Quality is saving this state inside of the report. But for when working with the PM Analyze, we want to see the complete states or all the states of a specific time range. So that means we have to store the data inside of the PM server so that we get access to not only the current value, so to all the value too. So that means we have to store this information inside of the tech archive, and we can find this information now in the @eval station and the state models here. So like we have used it for the PM Quality, we will now add this machine state tag, the internal tag for the state model inside of the process value archive. Sorry, so we can just drag and drop them here, and you see we have now added these machine state tag to the tech archive, so we can store all the new machine states we are getting from a simulation inside of the PM server, so that we can display them later in the PM Analyze. So the next thing we want to do is we want to calculate the availability of this machine. For that, we first need to configure some schedules here. As I have explained before, or I think it was yesterday or the day before, I'm not sure, but we have talked about the dynamic schedules, shift schedules, and static schedules. Just again, as a summary, you can have a dynamic schedule here. That means we have a trigger tag and start and end condition. So we say we want to start with triggering the calculation and we want to stop with it. So this is the dynamic schedule. We will not need, or we will not use that one here in this project, so I will delete it again. Then we can have a static schedule. So that means we can just have a schedule, for example, for every day, every minute, or whatever. And for the calculation of the availability, we want to have a daily schedule. So that means we want to calculate the availability on a daily basis. So we want to change the name here to every day, for example, every day. And then we can decide which interval mode we want to use. So there's a fixed interval or a sliding interval. Difference between them: in a fixed interval, we just trigger the calculation once a day. So if we change that one to daily and then 1 day, so every day the calculation is triggered and that's it. If we select sliding interval, we get some intermediate values. So if we open the online help, so maybe we can find the diagram which explains that a little. This is in schedules and shift schedules. Where is this one? Right, so we have the fixed interval, so that means we have the execution time every day, so that means every day the calculation is triggered. And if we scroll down to the sliding interval, then you can see we have the execution time, so the time, if I put it a little bit to the side, the execution time is that one here, so every day at 9 a.m. and 53 minutes, the calculation is triggered. But if we're working in the sliding interval, we also can have it, in this case, every 15 minutes, the calculation will also be triggered. So that means we start with the, or for the time range of the calculation, we start at this time, so 9 a.m. and 53 minutes, and then after, so that means at this time, the first time the calculation is triggered, and then after 15 minutes, we re-trigger the calculation from this time to the first 15 minutes, so time range then, and then after the next 15 minutes, we re-trigger the calculation. So that means we start at this time, and then 30 minutes later, we have the time range for the calculation. So it's not the complete day. So it's just with starting of the execution time. So with this time, and then every 15 minutes we increase the time range there until we have the complete day, because we have here in a daily base. So that means we get some intermediate values which we can then save inside of the tech archive.
Một cái này mình hay dùng á.
Especially
Đầu tiên thì chu kỳ của nó là 15 rồi sau đấy 30 là
good
45
idea
này.
to use the sliding interval if you want to
Nó lấy ít hơn.
get
Gọi là
access
cái này
to
là gọi
the
là
values
sliding.
at each time. So that means, for example, if you just do that on this time here, then you will get one value of this calculation. So you get one result of the availability only at this time each day. If you are working with sliding interval, you get the intermediate values. So that means you can every time you open the
Tức là nó trượt 15 phút, lần sau nó trượt thêm 15 phút nữa, trượt slide.
Tức là ví dụ như giờ anh lấy từ lúc 9 giờ.
Chỉ ở 9 giờ 53 phút, sau đó 15 phút sau, rồi sau đấy 30 phút sau nó mới lấy. Nó trượt thêm 15 phút nữa. Không biết là thực tế nó cần thế
Còn đó là gì ta?
And using the intermediate values or the sliding interval, we're just increasing the time range for the calculation there. So we start at 9 a.m. and 53 minutes in this case. Of course, we can change them to midnight, for example. And then we receive every 15 minutes, we get an intermediate value for this point of time. Right, so we will change that to midnight so that we receive the value for a complete day. And we will change that one here to 1 minute. So we will go down to 1 minute so that we do not have to wait. Sorry.
Nó không có trượt đâu, cứ 1 phút.
Như chu kỳ á, em thấy nó giống chu kỳ hơn là trượt á.
1 phút là ghi.
And I will save these changes here so that we now have.
Không phải đâu, nó trượt. Chứ không phải là đấy đâu, trượt tức là nó tăng dần á.
Every minute so that we can get the intermediate values.
Nó là every minute mà.
That means we want to calculate the availability then on a daily base, and furthermore, for example, we want to get the availability for each shift. So we will define a new shift definition here. So we add a new shift schedule. We go to the shift schedule here. We can give it another name. So, for example, shifts, like that. And then same setting again, you can decide if you want to have a fixed interval, so that means you do not have any intermediate values, or if you want to have the sliding interval, so you will get intermediate values, and the same thing here, we do not want to wait a long time, so we just change that to every minute, so that we receive an intermediate value every minute here. And then we can go to shift definitions, and then we can define all shifts which are available here. So as I just have mentioned in the PM quality presentation, then we can, or by default, we have the normal operations. So for example, if we do not have any holiday operation now or whatever, we can now start configuring our shifts. There's another question in the chat. Could you tell us an application that needs to be applied sliding schedule? And sliding interval, you mean? So sliding schedule is not available. So you mean schedule with a sliding interval, or what do you mean exactly? Yes. Okay. So from my side, I always recommend to use the sliding intervals, just because maybe you create the value at a time when nobody is working. So for example, the people from the office who will have a look at the PM analyze part, for example, they are just working from 9 to 5. But in this case, we have, for example, configured the static schedule at midnight, that would mean we will never see any value at the day. So we have to wait until midnight of the next day to receive the information for the current day. So working with this sliding interval means that if the office people are there and start working, analyzing how the process is running, so how the machines are working, for example, then they get already some values which they can use for the analyzing part of how the process is going on today, without having to wait until the next day so we get the results. So that means we can directly have a look at the current values there, and we do not have to wait until the complete day is finished to get any information about what was going on, for example. So from my point of view, you will always need the sliding interval because you want to have these intermediate values there.
Chung không hiểu lắm. Không hiểu cái
Same
mình đang
thing
hỏi cái sliding
is
mục đích
for
này.
reports, for example. So if you want to get access to a report of the current data, for example, you also want to have access to the report at the current moment. So you don't want to wait until tomorrow until you get an idea of the data from today, for example. So it would mean we would get every minute. So when we're using this static schedule we have configured here, that would mean we would get every minute we get a new report. We can just override the old one because it contains the same data, including the next minute. And then after one day, we will have the report for the whole day. But for example, after 12 hours of this one day, we still have access to the report and can have a look at the data from midnight until 12 p.m. Right? Yes, until 12 p.m. And still have a look at all this data from midnight until now. And then, for example, 1 hour later, we can just get the information from midnight until 1 p.m., for example. So same thing for the reports. If you want to get access to the data, not only after the time range you have selected inside of the schedule, so then you can just use the sliding interval so that you have the intermediate values. That means you can have a look at it every time, and then you will receive the data from the start of the time range, so at midnight in this example, until the current moment, or the actual moment. Let's come back to the shift schedule here. So now we can define our shifts here. So for example, we have a morning and day shift, or morning shift, a day shift, and a night shift, for example. So of course you can define the shifts the customer then has here. You can define on which days this shift is valid. So for example, all of our employees are happy because they just have to work on Monday to Friday. And the morning shift, for example, can start at 6 a.m. until 2 p.m. 2 p.m. And the day shift starts 2 p.m. until 8 p.m., for example, and they start at 8 p.m. until 6 a.m., for example. So we have seen before the shifts are highlighted in red because one shift was starting while another one was running, and normally you just have one shift is ended and the next shift starts. So that means it's like that. So then you see it's not longer highlighted in red anymore. So that means everything is okay here. You can also change the color of these shifts. So you see them in the preview here, or if you go, we save the changes, and then we go to the calendar, then we can also see all of these shifts. And using this calendar here, so this is also available as a control, which you can include to your recency runtime. You can also have some adjustments. So that means
tạo cái này vẫn có áp vô trong cái gì là kế hoạch sản xuất được đúng không?
Đấy. Cái này là đặt cái tên thôi. Là cái tên sau đấy mình sử dụng nó vào mục đích nào.
So not every employee is today on the plant, so it's only the holiday.
Đây là cái kế hoạch, tức là cái giống kiểu mình làm nó cái timer nó chạy kiểu này. Rồi sau đấy cụ thể cái bài toán là chạy theo shift cũng được. Giống như mình làm mình định nghĩa là 1 phút. Rồi sau đấy mình nói là cái task này chạy theo phút đó. Thì nó 1 phút nó chạy lên.
Tức là
cũng giống như mình định nghĩa ra cái shift này.
Nếu mà định nghĩa này thì nó trả task xuống PLC chạy chứ không phải là nó chạy qua BIM control.
Không, cái này nó chạy trên nền này, cho PLC không liên quan. Hoặc là cho PLC chạy cũng được. Mình làm một cái bit nào đó chạy theo shift thì PLC nó chạy theo shift này. Đấy là do mình liên kết thôi.
Chờ coi cái này nó liên kết với lại BIM control.
Come back to today or whatever. So you can define the shift calendar here. So it means which shift is available on which day, for example. Right. So that's about the schedules. And the dynamic schedule is working in a similar way. So as I just said, the dynamic schedule is similar to a static schedule. Difference is the static schedule is just triggered or is just executing every day, for example. And the dynamic schedule has just a start and end bit or a start and end condition for the time range of this schedule then, but we will not need that one here for our calculation, so we will not add any dynamic schedule here. So after we have now created the schedules, we can now create a calculation. For that we go to calculations, do a right click and add a new calculation schema here.
Cái calculation nó có thể chạy theo cái calendar đó.
General to change the name, and we want to calculate the availability here. So I will change the name to availability. Will it be red? If you want, you can add a description, and you can decide if this calculation is active or not. So after you have configured the complete calculation thing, you can say at the moment we do not need to calculate it, and then you can just deactivate it, and only if the calculation is activated, then we can calculate using this calculation, or then we can execute this calculation here. So now we go to the structure tab, and now we have to define the calculation algorithm or the calculation rule here. So what we want to do within this calculation. As I just said, we want to calculate the availability of our machine, which is producing our product for the fume control and fume quality part here. So that means the availability is defined by the time where the machine is productive, and this time is divided by the time the machine should be productive. So it can be that there is an error state or something like that. And if you then, and then you get the availability, and then of course, for example, you can multiply that with 100, so you get the availability in percent. So because we do not have to get this time where the machine was in a specific state, where it can be really complex, but using the calculation blocks here inside of the calculations, it's quite simple because we have a calculation block which directly does exactly this. So that means if we add that one to our structure, we receive the time the machine was in a specific state. So we do not have to work on these states to get this information, how long it was in a productive state or not. So we can just take a calculation block here. And that means we first need this calculation block, and that is a time categorizer for states. So we can just select them from the list here, drag and drop them to the structure, and then we have added this block to the structure. Then you see we have an input pin, so that means we're just configuring the calculation schema at the moment, but later we have to instantiate this calculation, and that means we need to get the info, or we have to give the information which source data should be used to calculate with. And for that, we need an input pin. So that means in the first step, we have to select this input thing here, do a right click, and then we can create and connect to pin. And now we have, you see, we have the input here. So that means we then have the option that we can insert the source data then to the instance of this calculation. So you always have to do this with the first block you have added to your calculation here. Then what you have seen when we do a right click on this input thing of the time categorizer, we have to select which state model definition we want to use for this time categorizer. So which state model we want to use here. So in this case, we want to use the machine states. So we just select that one here. And then we have to configure the time categorizer itself. So we can just do a double click on this block to get the configuration here. And now you see we have some categories here. We can decide if they are enabled or not. The current state is empty, so that means we first have to decide which steps we want to, which states we want to assign to this category. For that, we can just use the button here. And as we have selected the machine state model here, that means we now have access to all of the states we have configured inside of the state model definition, and we can now select the states we need for this category here. So as I just said, the availability is calculated when we take the time the machine is productive and divide this time through the time the machine should be running, so where it's scheduled for production. So that means we need, in the first step, we need the time the machine was productive, so when it was running, or when it was productive, so it was doing something. So, and you see, this is why we have configured the hierarchy of the state model, because in that case, now I can just click on all the productive group, and it automatically enables, or it automatically takes all the corresponding states here. If we have not created a hierarchy, then I would have to select all of that one here, for example. And it's, of course, it's easier to just have one click than to have 4 of them, because sometimes you have some more states than available, and then of course it gets more complex here. In our case, in the first step on the category 1, we need all the productive states, and on the second category, we want to have all the states the machine should be running, so also so not only the productive ones, but also the unproductive ones, so when the machine was in an error state.
Hiểu đoạn này không?
So we select that one here, and now we see we have the productive state on category 1 and
Cái này cái hàng để
state the
tính
machine
thời gian,
tổng thời gian đúng
tổng
không?
thời gian mà mình có thể phân loại những cái tín hiệu đấy mà ví dụ máy nó ở trạng thái nào lúc đấy mình gộp lại, mình nói là máy đang ở sẵn sàng hay là máy không sẵn sàng, lúc đấy từ đó mình tính ra được cái availability.
Now receive for all the categories we have enabled, we receive the count and the time. And for the availability, we need the time when the machine was in these specific states. That means we can now take the next calculation block, so what we want to do with the result of this time categorizer. So we want to divide something, so we can just select the divide block, drag and drop
Công thức mà tính availability á,
and now
phải
we
chia
can
cho cái thời gian mà nó sản xuất, chia cho tổng thời gian.
For the divide block here,
cái output 1
the category 1 time,
tổng cái này tổng thời
and
gian.
the category 2 time.
Cái này
Tổng ở dưới.
At category 1, we have all the states the machine is productive, and on category 2, we have all the states the machine should be productive. And the result of this division here is the availability. So quite simple here, and we do not want just to get the availability because it's a 0 point whatever number. So we want an multiply block, and we want to add the result of, so we want to take the availability, so the result of this division here as the factor 1 of the multiply, and then we want to multiply that one with 100, so we go to constant and add a constant number. And a constant number has two outputs. We can have it as a D word or a double. D word is an unsigned 32-bit value, and the double output is a 64-bit floating point number. So depending on what you want to do here, you can decide which one you want to select here. So in our case, we can just take the double output, for example, because we're of course getting we get a floating point number from here, so we can also take the floating point number to multiply that one. And if we do a double click on the constant number, we can configure the constant number. So in this case, of course, it's 100, so that we get the availability at the end in percent. And now you see we have the multiply, and we get the result of the multiply here. And now we are finished with this calculation. So that means we can now end the calculation so that we can get the result. And for that, we have to do a similar thing as we have done for the input. So that means we go to result here, do a right click, and then we can add an output pin, where then the result is saved in. So we want to change the name here because we do not want to have result 1. We want to know which information is stored within this pin. So it's availability, in percent. So I add a percent sign after it, and we see the type is a floating point number. And we can click on OK, so the name has changed. And maybe furthermore, we want to get the result in not only in percent, so we want the absolute value, so the 0 point whatever number thing. And we can also or you can see here, the calculation is finished, so no chance to get another output of that one, for example. But there's another way to do this. So for that, there is a bypass number block. And we can find it in the group bypass. And if we add that one here, so the bypass number block does not do anything. It is just enabling that we can get the result, or we can get an output which is not used, or which is not configured to be used several times. Then we can just use the bypass number block so that we can get the information a second time, for example. So again, bypass number doesn't do anything, but we have to insert the output pin here so that we receive the result of this calculation here, and this is just the availability. Availability. Okay. And again, we can see which tag type it is, so it's again a floating point number. So what we have now done is we have built up the calculation for the availability, and we get the availability as an absolute value, and we get the availability. Now save the changes, and now we have the calculation of this calculation, so that we can insert the source data, so which data we want to.
Cái này mà bỏ ở đây cũng được. Tức là giờ mình tạo một cái biến là availability. Thằng này 0.3 thì thằng này là 30%. Thằng này phải nhân 100%. Còn thằng kia là 0.3. Mình muốn tạo hai cái biến. Giờ mới instantiate này. Khi này là function block thôi, MB thôi. Kiểu như vậy. Giờ mới tạo ra các cái DB. Lúc này mới sai được.
So we want to have the date availability, for example. If you want to, you can add a description here. Same thing, you can, as you can deactivate the complete the complete calculation schema, you can also deactivate just one instance of this calculation, for example. And then you have to select a schedule. So when should this calculation be executed? If you want to work with shifts, you can select the shift changeover, for example, that we want to have it on a daily basis. So we go to the archive query here, and there we have the time-based execution. So that means we can just select the schedule we want to use here. So every day, for example. And now, if we save the changes and then we get the availability on a daily basis. There's another checkbox here available, so value change. So that means if the input value, we will define in a few seconds, if the input value is changing, then the calculation is re-executed. So for example, if we are not calculating the availability, we're just calculating some other things, for example, and the input value is changing, then the complete calculation is re-executed, so we receive the calculation result then. For us, it's okay if we recalculate it if the value is changing, so we can just leave it as it is. And now we go to pins. Yes, we want to save the changes. We go to pins, and inside of this pin tab, we can now configure the source data, so which data we want to use for this calculation. So you see here we have the input pins and the output pins we have added to our calculation, where we can now add some text to it. Sorry. So for the input, we need the machine state tag, so the internal one which we have created from our state model. So that means we go to the tag archive, because we need the tag, not only the current value of this tag, we need the value of this tag for a complete day. So that means we need the archive tag here. Then we have to select the tag archive where this data is stored, and then we need the machine state one state tag here. And then, like we know from the tag archives, we can just drag and drop the tag to the specific field. So we can take that one and we can insert it to the input field here. And now we have the source data of this calculation. So which data should be used for the calculation. And you see for the output, there is already an internal tag created for each output. So you see again, it's the internal tag. And you see that we have created an internal tag for each output pin we have connected to the calculation.
Cái bộ nguyên gồm là một cái máy thôi, nó vẫn làm việc
calculation result is only available inside of the Kim server.
Bật điện lên mà chạy hay không chạy, mức độ sẵn sàng của nó thế nào. Cuối ngày mình tính được là cái hiệu năng sản xuất của nó, hoặc là cuối tháng, hoặc cuối năm, thì cái đấy gọi là OI.
So we can find them in the miscellaneous, and there we have the day availability for that one here. And I forgot to add and check for the availability in percent, but doesn't matter. We also work with the internal one. Just to show you now, we can write back the information from the internal tag to the WinSystem tag, so we get the information also in WinSystem. So we can save that one. If we now go back to the next tab here, to function blocks, then we can see which function blocks we are using inside of this calculation. Normally this tab is not really important for you. I just want to show you that we have the function blocks here. You see the state, so everything is okay. If we have executed this calculation, then you also see the calculation duration here, but doesn't matter. And the last tab is just an output, so then you can see, depending on the calculation blocks you're using in the calculation, you can see what the calculation is doing here and which output you receive. As I remember correctly, for the calculation blocks we have used, we will not receive any output thing here. This is important, for example, if you have a block use and function block like send email, write file, or something like that, or create report, because then you receive any information here in this list. But I think for the function blocks we have used in our calculation, we do not get any information. So now we have the availability calculated on a daily basis, and now we want to do the same thing for the shift. So we add a new calculation. So this is the shift availability. We want to select the shifts for that one. We save that one, go to the pin. So same thing again. We go to the archive text. We have to decide which machine state or which state model tag we want to use for this calculation. Of course, we want to take the same tag here. So again, the machine state one state. Again, we want to write back the shift availability to WinSys again. So miscellaneous shift availability and that one. So we can save the changes. So we have the same calculation used for the day availability and for the shift availability.
Ngoài cái này nó còn tính được cái gì nữa?
Do mình nói calculation cái việc nó đó á, anh phải.
We want to get the data for a whole day, for example.
Cái thứ việc đó, cái việc nào qua cái
results
nhiều
in the tag archive, so that we not only have the current value when it is
cái này là một ứng dụng ví dụ để tiếng OI thôi.
The results for a longer time, so that we get access to all the information there. So we go back to the tag archive, go to text, and here we can now add the results of the calculation. We can find them in the add eval station in output, because it's the result of a calculation. And here you can find all of the 4 output pins or the internal output tags, and we can just add them to the tag archive here. So we save the changes so that we receive the calculation results inside of the archive here. So we will now open the PM Analyze client so that we have a look at the values we have created here. So if we open that one, make it a little bit bigger. So this is the PM Analyze client application. So the one we need to display the data. And by default, if you do not have entered any workspaces or whatever, then you will see the list of all the alarms. So you see my script in the background is running, so we have received some alarms here. I can scroll down, and by default, the time range is always the current day. So if we now change that one, for example, for the current hour, click on refresh, then we will only receive the alarms for the current hour. So you see it's from this moment on, so from 10 a.m. and 28 minutes, and then it's just at 10 a.m. because it's the current hour from 10 to 11, so you can see that in the time range here. If we select the whole day, then if I scroll down, we get some edit just started at 10 a.m. Could be maybe I have added this one at 10 a.m. Maybe, I'm not sure. But if we have some more data, then we would see them here. Then, of course, we could see the information of the last 1 hour, for example.
Một giờ cuối cùng này, ví dụ này.
Day, for example. And then we see the information from now until the last day. So you see it from the time range here. So from the current time until yesterday to the same time. So, and if we scroll down now, you can see all the alarms we have created yesterday when starting the batches. So you see we have started the batch on the production unit 1. So you see also the alarms from yesterday when I changed the time range here, for example. So same thing, for example, we have NPM quality installed on this PC, so we can select the batches here. So that means, for example, we do not have any batches from today, but we have batches from yesterday. And if we select one of these batches there, then you see in the background, we only see the alarms in this time range of the batch running time. So if I select that one, then it's changing for the corresponding alarms for this batch. So same thing, if we go back 2 days and select anything, then you see that the alarms are changing, and you see that the time range here will change, and this belongs to the running time of the batch here. Right. Same thing for shifts. So we have configured and shift schedule, so that means we can now use the shifts to display only the data which were inside of this shift. So for example, today we are now in the morning shift. So if I select that one, and refresh the thing, then we see only the alarms inside of this shift. And of course we cannot see the shifts from yesterday, for example, because yesterday we do not have the shifts available, but after we have created the shifts, then we can see for all the further shifts, we can see all the alarms here, for example. We do not have a context archive at the moment, and value search is just, we can select the time range here, then we can select which tag value we want to see here, and then same thing, then you see, then it's chosen, or it selects the timestamp of this value, and then you see all the alarms for that one. So we go back to the current day here, refresh that one, and we also have an auto refresh. So at the moment you have seen I have clicked on refresh to get all the new alarms, for example, and if we activate the auto refresh and then start the auto refresh, then we will get all new alarms too. So we do not have to refresh it manually. So this list will increase automatically for all new alarms which are coming. You can also decide which columns or which alarm blocks you want to see here. So for that, just do a right click on the list of columns here, and then you can decide which you want to see here. So for example, just want to see them here, for example, then you can just
còn cái này là alarm, còn cái này là ví dụ mình chọn shift, mình chọn mốc thời gian. Còn cái này
right, so that's it for the alarm. So you have seen
cái này là view alarm.
So it was increasing this list here, so I will now stop that one. For the alarms. And if we want to see process values, then we can go to this one here. Here we see at the moment alarms is selected, so that means this is the alarm archive. And we can also change to the tag archive we have configured in the PM server. If we have more than one alarm archive or more than one tag archive, then we would see all of the archives available